This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome to the final edition of the Confessions podcast.
Oh, rubbish.
Oh no, sorry about that.
Oh.
Hope everyone had a lovely Christmas. Sorry to bring you down, but there you go. Hey, you got this. Consider this as like the extra bonus bit, which you weren't expecting. We've managed to make a sneaky trip back into the studio after a few days of Christmas food. Anyway, we're going to deliver the last podcast of the year. Here we go.
Coming up, you can hear Tony's Yes Confession featuring the very lovely Rick Wakeman.
Emily's bonfire confession, Threads Are Burning.
Claire's quiche story, Jacqueline Wilson Says, which features Jacqueline herself.
Maths teacher Rebecca and her classroom catastrophe, Teach Your Children Smell. But first we kick off with Alan's nudist tale, I'm in love with a German theme park.
Please be seated.
Tonight's comes from Alan. Alan, thank you very much. Your confessions always welcome. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. Alan says, Simon and his assemblage of able absolvers. This tale takes us back about 10 years to when I lived in Germany, the lovely city of Heidelberg, to be precise, the gorgeous little place that's home to Germany's oldest university. There's also a beautiful Schloss castle there, mountains of German sausages and mountains of potatoes. And at that time, our family, me, my better half, and our 3 children, then aged between 5 and 12. It was a good life, but as with any expats, we missed people from back home. So in the summer in question, we invited lots of groups of friends to come and stay for a bit. However, only one lot took us up on the offer. For the purposes of this tale, we'll call them the Blands. They were 2 parents and their 2 kids, same ages as ours, which is how we knew them, really, basically through their children. The parents were lovely enough, and you know the sort. No strong opinions to have a great argument with over a few beers, no silliness, everything straight and proper and quiet. Their kids had fun with ours, and we tried to have fun with the adults, and it was okay. They were lovely, lovely people. Just a little bit dull, a little bit straight. So nearly a week into their visit, we'd done all the normal tourist things in the city. We'd walked the lovely Flossenweg at least twice, seen the student jail, the Schloss, again, with its famous big barrel. We ate German sausages and German potatoes, as I think I might have mentioned. But before long, we were running out of things to do, and our conversation was drying up. They just didn't seem that interested in what we wanted to show them and expressed little desire to see or do any particular thing. Then my better half reminded me of a place, a water park that's not too distant from Heidelberg, with a selection of slides and a wave machine for the kids and a thermal bath and spa with saunas, massages for the adults. Well done. That's going to fill an afternoon, we thought. What a fine idea. We suggested it and could see the parents were unsure, but their kids strongly hinted that they needed to go to this place. So the following afternoon we headed there. We had a whale of a time. The 6 kids, 5 actual children, and me, had a ball sliding the slides and jumping about in the waves. Mr. Bland tried to join in a bit and even seemed to loosen up just a touch. Mrs. Bland was a bit overwhelmed by the noise and the bustle, but coped by having lots of rests in the sauna and a dip or 5 in the hot, minerally pools of the spa. And we all ate our tea in the very good cafe, yet more German sausage and more German potato. After a couple of hours, the Bland parents wanted to leave, but their kids convinced them to stay a little bit longer, to which they grudgingly agreed. About 10 minutes after this, the children and I were all playing in the main pool, while my wife and the Blands were sitting on some loungers. And then this happened. What do you think that's going to mean?
I think it's the big wave machine.
Are they on a cruise? Inadvertently.
Alan says it was at this point that pretty much every single other person in the place took off their clothes.
Oh!
Bathing suits included. That's right, the water park in an instant became a nudist water park.
Wow!
And our guests' faces were a sight to behold. I think I heard an actual gasp from Mrs. Bland as her jaw hung agape. After a moment, towels were whisked out and their children were ushered quickly towards the changing rooms. We hurried after them with our apologies ringing out, "We're ever so sorry. We are so sorry. We had no idea." And we headed away from the pool. This, though, really is our confession. It's not that we feel guilty for labelling these lovely folk as boring stick-in-the-muds, but the fact of the matter is that we did know about the sudden nudity. We did know what that meant. We'd heard it before. We're a bit surprised on our first time, to be honest, but when in Germany, it's not unheard of to see the occasional naked person. Anyway, they seem a lot less hung up than the Brits. Anyway, not only that, but we actually picked this particular day of the week to go for this story to play out. Our kids also knew that this would happen, and they'd played along with us even when we asked them not to tell their friends about it. In fact, it was with our eldest's help that we managed to cajole their kids, to cajole their parents to stay long enough so we'd be there when the naked siren went off.
Do it again.
It's the naked siren, everybody. So I have to ask forgiveness from you for all subjecting these lovely, if straight folk to the sight of a few hundred naked Germans of all ages and sizes. In our defence, the conversation flowed much more easily that evening, as we all had something new and interesting to discuss, and I'm sure it was a great anecdote for them on their way home. I'm sure it was, amongst many other things. Alan, thank you very much indeed. First confession of the week, very good, very exciting. Joe, what do you think?
Superb, absolutely superb. Desperate times call for desperate measures, obviously, and they were having the dullest week of their lives with these unfortunate people who they just weren't compatible with. I'm sure.
Well, they did invite them in the first place.
Yeah, true. But no, there's nothing to forgive. Don't blame them in the slightest. But I would like to know, did they get naked as well? Did they strip off?
No, I think they didn't. I think they just said, let's all just go
They
away.
played the prank and then they just legged it. But then at least they had something to talk about in the evening.
They did, and it all went right, and the conversation flowed much more happily.
This is
after
great.
that.
This is just too great. Totally forgiven.
Young Bobby.
Yeah, I think they didn't, because otherwise that tea time, that following on tea time, would not have been so great. I don't. Also, I'm a little bit confused. Is why at the swimming pool? Why do you only get naked at the sound of a siren? Why isn't it naked all the time? Why is it okay? Clothes on, clothes off. Is it? I suppose some people don't want to.
Maybe
so
it's
they
a
give you
warning, or maybe you know that it's 6 o'clock or something.
Okay, that's it. Clothes off time.
And people know when to arrive to take off their clothes.
And then to leave before the 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I see. Right. Okay.
I've never heard of this before, though. Have you?
Can you actually imagine going to a swimming bath with slides and waves? And
imagine the burns.
And then the naked hooter going off.
Is there extra chlorine in the water then?
Definitely.
Anyway, I think,
that.
having said that, I do think it's very funny, and it's difficult if you're with people that are not, So actually, on this case, I'm going to forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's tale comes from Rebecca. Dear Simon, Joe, and the cacophony of atonement. Which kind of makes that you, Bobby. You are the cacophony of atonement.
All on her own.
All
Perfectly
myself.
capable of that.
I've been a dedicated listener for many years. In fact, given that my husband and I have very different tastes in music, the only thing that we agree on is listening to the Confessions feature when we travel to and from work, usually on the podcast. I'm a teacher, and as anyone who was taught in a secondary school would know, as much as you try to treat all the little darlings with the same level of care and attention, there is always that one exceptional pupil who can just wind you up something rotten and really, really get under your skin. I have a feeling already that teachers will be telling us anonymously precisely who those annoying children are. Well, for me, that student, says Rebecca, was Peter. He was the kind of student who picked up on every typo on the board, laughed when technology failed, as if, and took great glee if someone mispronounced a word when reading to the group. Peter was never short of his supply of backhanded remarks, criticisms, and comments. Drove me crazy. Well, you can imagine Peter's glee when one small day, whilst I was invigilating an exam, the following happened. Imagine a silent, small exam room with about 20 students all carefully engaged in demonstrating their mathematical acumen. Peter, a mathematical whiz kid, raised his hand for additional paper. I put 1 foot forward to deliver the requested paper, and a loud parp and rather noxious wind bellowed across the room. I froze, knowing that my behind had probably not finished, but in the knowledge that I had to get the paper to Peter. So with a little hesitation, I continued to make my way towards Peter's desk, the silence of the exam room being broken by the loud issuance of wind that accompanied each step. You know when that happens? It's always embarrassing, but you don't normally do it in front of many children. Peter looked triumphant as the students were all distracted by my musical accompaniment to their exam, happy in the knowledge that I had to keep making more steps to reach the desk. But this, I'm afraid to say, is only the start of the tale, because it seemed I had an unfitting revenge up my sleeve just 1 week later. This indeed is just the opening salvo. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in algebra class when I noticed a sharp pain in my left side, just below my chest. Putting it down to indigestion, I carried on with the lesson, continuing to gesticulate with much gusto, as I am prone to do. The sharp pain came again, but maths education being important, I ignored it and carried on. Peter, as usual, raised his hand to challenge some well-regarded mathematical law that everyone's agreed on, like forever, when suddenly the underwire of my bra sprang out of the top of my blouse and flew with extraordinary power, like in a cartoon, across the classroom and hit Peter smack between the eyes. Imagine such a thing. Fortunately, the wire had flown so fast, he had no idea it was my undergarments that had been the source of the curved wire, and being a maths nerd, he had no concept of what the actual source of such a shaped wire might be in the first place. Needless to say, I did not own up, but hastily retrieved the wire and gave a general chat to the class about the naughtiness of throwing objects indoors, because no one had owned up. I gave him a good telling off. So, clearly the forgiveness here is not from Peter, who made many a good teacher's life a misery, but from the class whose maths exam I disrupted, and for whom I really put the bra in the algebra, if you see what I'm saying. Maybe you'll forgive me for that. And for giving them a telling off for throwing objects around when I knew that it was me all along. Now, I'm amazed that such a thing is actually technically possible. That would happen.
With that accuracy.
Well, I think that is just absolute serendipity, isn't it?
That's fantastic that it actually got him between the eyes.
The right one between the eyes.
Yes.
I dream of needing a wire in a bra, can I just say? I've never owned one of those. Vests for me.
We're already veering into unexpected territory. Anyway, Joe, what do you say to Rebecca?
I think the rest of the class knew exactly what had happened, and I think that they secretly were applauding what happened, because he was obviously one of those kids who just annoyed absolutely everybody. So I think they would have gone, yes, good shot, miss. So forgive him.
Okay, all right. Bobby.
I love this. I absolutely love this. I think it's amazing that it can shoot out, but they do. When they're not safely stitched in and they work their way out, and one move and boom. Yeah, usually in the washing machine, and then you have to call an engineer to kind of unwrangle it. Once they're bent, they're very difficult to bend back. So, Joe, I can say I don't think you've missed out on anything.
Okay, thank you, Bobby.
I think you're fine. I think you're absolutely fine. You haven't missed out. I love this, and I think actually you got him back. The problem with Peter is, of course, he's not given enough to do. That's the problem with Peter. He's obviously super smart, and you should have made him prefect or something. There you go. Or you could have given him a physics exam with that.
Or just kicked him out.
Don't think you're allowed to.
For being
I think
irritating.
He's a very, very clever person. You are forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's comes from Claire. Thank you, Claire. Simon, Joe and Bobby, my confession happened during the mid-1990s when I was working as a young librarian in a large urban high school. This was before the era of Harry Potter, and encouraging teenagers to read was an uphill struggle. Therefore, I decided to try and inspire the students with a visit from an author. And aiming for the very, very best, I wrote to Jacqueline Wilson, begging her to visit our school and inject some much-needed reading enthusiasm into our apathetic teenagers. I was over the moon when she wrote back and agreed. I must stress that although hugely popular, Jacqueline had not yet reached the stratosphere of fame that she enjoys today, and was, at that time, still visiting lots of schools. When I told them the news, the students were beyond excited. Computers were forgotten, discussions about which was the best band, Oasis or Blur, because this is a coloured, period fiction here, were abandoned, and conversations about last night's episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer faded into oblivion as talk of Jacqueline Wilson's visit reached fever pitch. The day arrived. Jacqueline received the red carpet treatment and unsurprisingly had a real affinity with the students. She spent the entire morning talking to them about her writing and answering all their questions, and by lunchtime we were both ready for a break. Being a woman of the world, I was sure that Jacqueline would appreciate some quiet time away from the hustle and bustle of school, so I had booked a table at the local hostelry. I was a little concerned that Jacqueline's distinctive looks and famous name may be instantly recognisable, and I was worried that people in the pub would mob her and demand autographs. As at the pub, we were greeted by the maître d'. I've never heard of a pub with a maître d', but anyway, a rather stringy and sullen woman who showed us to our table. The menu was somewhat limited, we are talking the mid-90s here, and we ordered quiche and chips. Classic combo. The food was passable, but the conversation was a delight. Jacqueline was so friendly and relaxed, and we chatted about our mutual love of music and books. I told a few amusing anecdotes about my job and was overjoyed when Jacqueline whipped out her notebook and jotted down an idea for a story. Flushed with success, I had visions of a dedication in her next book, with special thanks to Claire, without whose help, and so on and so on. Anyway, the pub was quiet, but I did notice that a family on the next table kept shooting us looks, and I grew increasingly concerned that Jacqueline's cover had been blown. The last thing I wanted was our relaxed lunch to be interrupted by gawping autograph hunters. Go away, I thought. We ordered coffees, and then I realised that time was running out and we needed to get back to school. I brought the conversation to a close, we put on our coats and stood ready to leave. The people on the next table were still eyeing us, so I swiftly ushered Jacqueline towards the exit. I realised we'd been rumbled when I saw the maître d' behind the bar frantically waving a piece of paper at us. Really, I thought irritably, the autograph hunters get everywhere. Can they not just leave a famous author alone for 5 minutes? I bundled Jacqueline out of the pub, into the car, back to the school. I have to say that she did appear slightly nonplussed by our swift exit, but I guessed that she was simply too well bred to comment on the annoyance of autograph hunters, and was probably really grateful that I had handled the situation with such aplomb. The afternoon session went well, and at the end of the day a taxi arrived to whisk Jacqueline back to the station, and we parted the best of friends. However, as I was heading back to the library, our school receptionist called me over. Now, our receptionist didn't have much tolerance for librarians like me and thought book weeks were a complete waste of time, so I have to say that her tone of voice was bordering on triumphant. "The manager of the Red Lion has phoned. She said you had quiche and chips twice and 2 coffees, and she wants to know when you're actually going to pay the bill." Well, I was horror-stricken. That waving piece of paper, Jacqueline's puzzlement when we raced out of the pub, it was all to do with the fact I hadn't paid the bill. My hopes of a dedication in her next book were dashed. Why would you dedicate a book to someone who's guilty of stealing quiche and chips? Therefore, I asked forgiveness not from the publican who received full payment and a red-faced apology the following day, not from the nosy family on the next table who clearly hadn't registered Jacqueline Wilson and were probably mildly confused by our speedy exit, but I would like to seek forgiveness from Jacqueline herself for being such a gauche, star-struck and overzealous young librarian, and if she's listening, I'm still waiting for that dedication. Well, it's a very interesting tale, and you can see how, Claire's very excited. I've said before, I think school librarians run the universe, and she's clearly thinking, this is how I can get things to work in my favour. All went very well, apart from the fact that she didn't pay the bill. Anyway, Jo goes first.
Well, as a librarian, I'm not myself a librarian, but as Claire being a librarian, I can imagine just how starstruck she was by meeting Jacqueline Wilson, who's a very wonderful person. But I'm obviously a little bit protective. It goes on quite a lot about the autograph hunters and trying to protect her from the autograph hunters. Mm-hmm. But the fact that she did take her out to a pub and treated her to quiche and chips, which is such a wonderful meal. I mean, the meal of kings and queens, I think. I think I'd forgive her just for getting in a little bit of a state because she's kind of flustered and she really, really loved Jacqueline Wilson and obviously just left in a hurry.
We'll have to mention quiche and chips to the Bosch boys, see if they can do
I love quiche and chips.
I'm sure they can do a vegan quiche. I'm sure they can, yeah. Anyway, Bobby, what do you say to Claire?
First of all, beans always with the quiche and chips. Anyway, moving on.
Baked beans.
Always hot baked beans, cold quiche and hot chips.
Yep,
there you go. Can I forgive this? I think so. What I really love about Claire is you just made an effort. You got an author in, and the only thing I do think, though, is if Jacqueline hadn't hit the heady heights, she might have liked to sign the autograph. You didn't need to be so protective. Maybe she liked the attention, but I think it's really easy, really, really, really easy to forgive you.
Yes.
This time.
Okay, so let's go back to the thing. Claire says, I would like to seek forgiveness from Jacqueline herself for being such a gauche, star-struck, overzealous young librarian, and if she's listening, I'm still waiting for that dedication. Are you listening, Jacqueline Wilson?
I am, Simon. I am listening and chuckling away.
Hey! It's Dame Jacqueline, and she's back on Radio 2. So you did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of school visits. I don't suppose you remember this one.
Well, I must admit there were quite a few similar occasions, but Claire, I love all school librarians, and I think you've always done a fantastic job. And I think you sound an absolute sweetheart, and you were trying so hard. I actually, truly don't mind signing autographs, but I'm so touched that you wanted to protect me, and also how lovely to have quiche and chips in the pub rather than some of those weird school meals on odd trays, just like prison food. So I forgive you 100%. Okay.
And just the thing about the notebook that you took out, is that something that you do regularly? Because she's still hoping to either be in a story or actually get a mention somewhere.
Just occasionally if somebody tells me something really amusing, I might say, look, do you mind if I jot that down? Truthfully, I have no idea what it was. But if Claire can recognise anything in any of my books that I've written since the 1990s, maybe she does need a dedication.
I actually need to ask forgiveness of my daughter, Coco, who's 9 years old, because when Jacqueline Wilson very kindly came on my show as part of the nation's favourites, I forgot to tell her that I got Jacqueline on the show, and we were going through her bookshelf the other day, and I'd got loads of your books, Jacqueline, and I said, oh yeah, and she was on my show a little while ago, and Coco just looked at me like, how did you not tell me she was coming in to talk to you? So I need to ask forgiveness of Coco.
Well, I promise the next time we meet up, I'll sign. Coco can even bring all her books in. I'll sign the lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That?
You're lovely.
And I have to add, just to make things worse for you, Joe, I have a photograph. My daughter loved Jacqueline Wilson as well, and I have a photograph of Natasha, Jacqueline Wilson and Mallory Blackman, who was also in the same photograph. So you just pass that on to Coco.
Yeah,
I'm sure that'll make her feel an awful lot better.
Thanks a bunch.
You mean thing.
Jacqueline, lovely to talk to you. When's your next book out?
I've had a book out in May, Rose Rivers, but if I could mention a brilliant adaptation of a book called Double Act, which is on at the Polka Theatre at the moment, smashing outing for a summer holiday treat. How about that?
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. There's Jacqueline Wilson adding some extra forgiveness for Claire.
The Confessions Podcast.
Our guest on the show today is Rick Wakeman, who'll be here just after 6:30 to talk about his new record. But he's actually here early. Hello, Rick, by the way.
Hello. I'm a bit worried now.
Yeah, well, because you've had an illustrious career, and I'm sure there are many things that people might have written in about.
Yeah.
A confession involving Rick Wakeman, but you can relax.
Thank you, Simon.
Here we go. Simon and the Collective. The year is 1973, for most of which I was 12. This confession, by the way, comes from Tony. Okay. Thank you, Tony.
All right.
I live with my parents, Joyce and Henry, my older sister Jacqueline, who was 16, and my older brother Michael, who was 17. Music has always been an important part of my life, both listening and playing. But in 1973, I was very much a novice and hadn't really found a genre of music that I was comfortable with. Michael was into rock and prog rock, so Genesis, The Who, Family, Pink Floyd, that kind of thing would often be playing in the house. One day, Michael came home with a new record called Tales from Topographic Ocean. Rick, why are you wincing like that?
Yeah, no, go on, please carry on, Simon. That's fine.
He'd just bought by a progressive rock band called Yes. Do you remember them?
Yes, I remember recording the album too.
He rushed home from work and went straight into the lounge where Dad's high-spec stereo system was, so he could play it before Dad got home. I was in the next room playing with my toys, but could clearly hear the music that was playing. Okay, so here we go. This is the revealing science of God dance. Is that right, Rick?
Something like that, yeah. It reveals something, I'm not quite sure.
That's you.
That's me, sir.
Anyway, so the confession continues from Tony. I've never heard anything like it. All types of instruments were in there. And not just guitar, drums and bass, but synthesizers, which I'd never heard before. So many interesting sounds, and all courtesy of Rick Wakeman. I was particularly taken by the way the record started. The singer singing in a monotone key, which built up in intensity until the rest of the band came in. I was spellbound. Every day that week, he would come home and go straight into the lounge to play it again. I duly sat in the other room and listened. Although he listened to the whole record, he would always start with the intro on side one. And so on. It doesn't fade like that. That's just me doing the edit fade. At school that week, all I could think about was this record. And I decided one day, when I got home, I would investigate it further. So one day when I knew my brother was going to be home a bit later, I went into the living room. When I found the record, I was amazed by the cover. The artwork was stunning. It opened like a book, and inside were all the lyrics, because that's what you did back in 1973. It was then that I decided that I wanted to hear it close up. I switched on the stereo system and adjusted the volume. I took the record out of the left side of the cover and removed it from its protective sleeve. The lights in the room reflected in the grooves. It was immaculate. Carefully, I placed the record on the turntable. Started it revolving. I lifted up the arm, slowly placed the needle on the spinning disc. In anticipation, I sat back in the chair and enjoyed it again. That's more yes on Radio 2 than recently.
Than ever. Yeah.
Than ever. Yeah. Suddenly, the front door closed with a bang. Michael has come home early. I shot up and I made a grab for the needle. I picked it off the record, but in my state of panic, the needle slipped from my grip and jumped across the record, the noise thumping through the speakers. Ah! This is a disaster. I reached over and grabbed the arm and placed it back on its stand. I removed the record and placed it back in its sleeve, then back in the cover. At that point, my sister Jacqueline came in, asking what the noise was, and I realised it was her that had come home, not Michael. Oh, nothing, I said. When she'd gone, I replaced the record in the same place that I'd found it. A bit later, Michael did return, and as usual, went into the lounge to play the record again. I sat in the next room, listening. The silence was deafening. Finally, I heard the stereo switch on, a record being removed from its sleeve and placed on the turntable, and then the needle gently touched the record. But this time, it was slightly different. Remember that, when you could damage the music? Oh, that scratch. Oh, no. What on earth? Shouted Michael, or words to that effect. Who has done that? Who has scratched my record? Mum went from the kitchen to see what the commotion was and was told about the gouge that had appeared in this new beautiful record. It was okay yesterday. Who has done this? The door opened and Mum was standing there with my brother, red-faced with anger, standing behind her. Did you scratch Michael's new record? She asked. I looked up with my best sad eyes and said, No, Ma, it wasn't me. Whether she believed me or not, we will never know, but she promised to buy Michael a replacement. Needless to say, I never touched any of my brother's records again, and I've never owned up to it until this moment right here. It has never been mentioned since. So clearly, I need to ask for forgiveness, not from my brother, as Mum did indeed buy him a new copy a couple of days later. I also don't seek forgiveness from my teachers at school, who, for that 1 week, found me to be a bit preoccupied with something other than schoolwork. I really need forgiveness from my mum because I lied and she had to buy Michael a new copy of the record, even though I think she probably did know it was me. And I guess I should probably apologise to Yes for damaging their work of art. Although, to be honest, Tony, they got 2 sales out of it, so I think that's fine. We're going to finish. We'll come to Rick last, but Lisa, do you forgive Tony for this crime against music?
Yeah, I'm really glad he's got that off his chest. He must feel very free.
No.
That's a kind of a prog reference.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's see if Bobby can manage that.
Tony, I know you were only little, and I love about it, your brother was playing music and you went, I like this. I just wish you'd have asked him. I wish you'd have gone, I really love that. Will you play it for me? You should have asked, but because you were little, this time you're forgiven.
But it was that horrible thing. You can damage and scratch your music, something which this new generation will not find out anyway. But it's basically all falls down to Rick here. What do you make of that, Rick? Do you forgive Tony or not?
I thought it sounded better. I mean, with so many weird things that we used to do percussion-wise, and it possibly something that we might have thought about doing for a later album. You never know.
What, adding a scratch?
Yeah.
So when I mentioned this particular album, Topographic Oceans, you went, oh.
Well, no, it just reminded me, when we recorded it, John and myself wanted to record in the country, because it was a big thing then to record in the country. Steve and Chris wanted to record in the city in London, and Alan used to sit on the fence and go, I'll go wherever. So we decided to bring the country to the city, and we went into Morgan Studios. And when I arrived,
is this a long anecdote?
No, it's nearly there. We had everything from haystacks, bales of hay, to like picket fences. We even had a cow with an electronic udder going backwards and forwards.
Those were the days, eh?
It was indeed.
I don't know what to say about that.
So you forgive Tony?
Oh, absolutely forgive him.
The Confessions Podcast.
This comes from Emily. Thank you, Emily. Thanks everyone who's sending in their confessions. Simon the Collective. I'm writing to ask forgiveness for my rather overzealous bonfire night duties. Many years ago, I was 8 years old. Bonfire night, my favourite night of the year. My dad had spent all afternoon building the fire, whilst my sister and I made a guy out of some old clothes Dad had grabbed from his wardrobe. My mum was baking potatoes and sausages in the kitchen, and things were getting pretty festive by dusk. Mum and Dad's friends arrived with their children, clanking their bottles of wine and talking about hot toddies. You know, that kind of conversation which parents have. The festivities soon began. My dad ceremoniously set fire to the fire. My dad's firework display left us oohing and ahhing. Mum's jacket potatoes and sausages all went down a treat, along with a lot of pop and mulled wine. This all took a few hours, and much merriment was had by all, until the fire died down and the parents all slowly decamped to the kitchen, leaving us kids to it. The fire really looked like it was going to go out, and we were having such a good time. We all took on the challenge of keeping the fire going no matter what. Twigs, sticks, grass, even flowers, but we soon ran out of supplies. I was sent off to the house to look for any old rubbish that would burn. I had a huge stack of comics and decided I would sacrifice a few. They burnt really well, and we whooped around the fire singing until they burnt out. My sister and I kept making trip after trip to get a few more comics to burn, to keep it going until we realised we'd burnt all the comics.
I have such a bad feeling about this.
You are quite correct to have that feeling. So the search was on for something else to keep the fire burning. I ran to my parents' wardrobe and looked through it and saw a velvet jacket. I held it up to my sister and I said, Mum never wears this. I don't think she even likes it.
Because it's very special.
I don't even think she likes it. She won't mind if we burn it. Will she? My sister hesitated a few seconds and then nodded and ran down the stairs to show our campfire mates that all was not lost. The fire would go on. Well, the jacket didn't take long to burn, and we were soon making multiple trips to my mum's wardrobe for more fuel. The parents were all having a grand time in the kitchen, smiling at us fondly and telling us what a great job we were doing of keeping the fire going. We carried on, buoyed by the excitement of it all and finding lots of clothes that Mum rarely wore.
Oh, my God.
Eventually, we had entirely emptied her wardrobe except for one item. It was a floor-length pink and white polka dot evening gown. I looked at my sister. That looks like a very special dress. I don't think we should burn that. My sister shook her head in agreement. We had finally to admit defeat and let the fire go out. It was a school night, and we suddenly felt very tired. Everyone left, and finally we went to bed. Next morning, my sister and I were woken by my mum banging around in her wardrobe and shouting at my dad, "I don't understand! Where is everything, Dave?" I hid under the bed covers and did my best impression of a very soundly asleep child as my mum stormed into our room and burnt her with a burnt rag in her hand. She'd obviously been out to check. "What have you done?" I shrunk further down as she asked my sister, "Did you burn all my clothes?" My sister, who was not so good at her very soundly asleep child impression, quavered, "Yes, but only the ones you don't wear. And it wasn't my idea, it was hers." She pointed at me. Mum was having none of it. "You're the older, you should have known better. All I have to work today is this ball gown, and it's pink." I decided to yawn very loudly and wake up at that point. "Oh, that's my favourite dress of yours, Mummy. I think you should wear it to work. It's very nice." Mum glared at me and stormed out of the room, berating my dad for some reason or other. My sister and I skulked around and got ready for school. We never did see what Mum wore to work that day, as Dad had been handed all the childcare duties by this point. We left Mum rummaging in the dirty laundry basket. We never heard another word about it from Mum or Dad, and I always wondered why until I asked her many years later. She said she felt so bad leaving us playing around a fire while they sat in the kitchen making merry with their friends that she was just grateful that nothing more serious had happened. So I asked forgiveness not from my mum, who was left with only a ball gown for workwear, nor from my dad, who was somehow to blame in the end, according to Mum, but I do seek forgiveness from my sister, who took the blame for the events of Bonfire Night and was ignored when she pointed out to my mum that I was the ringleader. The accusation, "You should have known better, you're older," was a recurring theme of many of our childhood escapades that we got caught on, and which I can honestly say were usually led by me. So I'd like to ask forgiveness from everybody. I just got carried away with the festivities. But I have to say, that's pretty extreme. Burning your mum's entire wardrobe apart from a ball dress. Anyway, here we go with sister.
Oh my gosh.
Sisters here. What do you say?
The sisters of mercy. Or not. There was that line that you just delivered, and I honestly thought she was going to say, "We never did see Mum again." I thought,
No.
because I would have done. But you know what? Mum would have gone out and got a whole new wardrobe. So always a silver lining on any
Yes.
cloud, you know. So, and how old were they?
8.
She was 8.
And the older one was older.
Older. So would they know? I think it's naivety, and it's, you know, just kind of being a little bit foolish, isn't it? And just being so excited about burning stuff, being fire starters. So forgiven.
Okay.
Why Mum's clothes? Why not Dad's clothes?
I don't know.
Dad,
Maybe
Dave's.
didn't have enough. What do you say, Bobby?
I'm so shocked. I'm so shocked that you do know that was wrong, even if you were given over to the
8
moment.
years old.
Yes, you do know not to raid your mum's wardrobe. I'm sure you weren't
And
allowed to go
burn
and yes, and burning it.
I would never have dared,
But
no.
your mum was right, actually. My thing is, where were your parents? It's your parents' fault. It is a bit their fault. Having said that, the mum was great, and she did get a new wardrobe. So I think actually you might get a full house. You're forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that's it. That's it from me. I mean, there'll be loads of Joe coming up in the new year.
But no confessions.
The No Confessions podcast. Who knows what the future holds?
Thanks for having me on Confessions. What a treat, one absolute treat.
Joe, thank you very much indeed, and a happy new year.
It's very kind of you.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.
Listen to more podcasts from Radio 2 by downloading the BBC Sounds app.